If you do not invest and continue to develop your top employees, you're going to be looking for new employees. Today we're going to be talking about the importance of employee one-on-ones.
I think a big thing that nobody really talks about is you need to have a one-on-one with your employee, but they don't talk about structure, right? Like, how do you structure those? Do you go into a meeting and talk the whole time about financials and numbers and KPIs? Like, maybe that's part of it, but how do you structure, okay, here's where we're at today. How do we get better, right? The purpose of a one-on-one is to, answer any questions that person might have, and then, get them to a better place or get them to perform better results. I think there are several different ways, and there's a million templates out there on the internet to figure out how to structure these. But I think, what do you think are some of the best ways to structure from a sales perspective as well as like an operations perspective to maximize each employee?
I think what it boils down to is like, what exactly are you trying to push?
Sure.
If you're meeting with sales, what's the goal of that meeting? You have your group meetings, your team meetings, you have your individual meetings, whether they're developmental, whether they're disciplinary, you have to have a goal of that meeting.
Yeah.
If we're just throwing meetings on the calendar just to fill up the calendar, that's how you piss off a sales rep. And I'm sure you can relate, but the one thing that pissed me off more than anything is if I just have a bunch of meetings on my calendar and I don't see any value, like, you take your sales reps off the floor, you're wasting their time.
I was probably a bad sales rep. I just didn't attend those meetings.
Yeah.
And I used to always say this. I said, money's made at my desk.
But it's true. It's true.
I was probably a bad one. So I'm probably not a good example of that. Now that I'm a leader, I'm like, okay, like, hey, you need to be in here. Like, this is good. This is important information, right? I think another thing, like, building strong relationships with that person and engaging with them, I think is huge, where you can, get to learn a little bit more about them and what they want. And, we talked about it on a couple podcasts ago, but, what are their goals? What is it that they truly want, right? And how do we help them achieve their goals? Going back to the structure piece, is there a way that you feel like has worked for you better than others?
Yeah, I think knowing your people, what they need help with, or, I mentioned this before, and I didn't really ask your question before, but, what is the goal of the meeting?
Yeah.
If you have an employee and you know that they're struggling with closing new accounts or penetrating one of their current clients, that is the goal of the meeting. And if you're meeting with a sales rep, how can we make that 15, 20, 30 minutes as valuable as possible?
Sure.
So that they're taking something away and they know, damn, that was a good meeting. Like, that helped big time. I'm going to go back on the sales floor and I'm doing that immediately. You have those meetings where it's their time. You also have your meetings where it's your time. Mm-hmm. What point do you want to get across? Like, how do you want to develop that employee? And it's usually very specific on why you're meeting, but you also want to have the time to give them the floor, where you're not just steamrolling them every single meeting and it's shoving information down their throat. It's their time.
I think you said something earlier that I love. It's like, okay, you go into a meeting, you set the goal, or like, this meeting is for this reason. Right. And I think you're right. Like, I think so many meetings or so many one-on-ones, you give the person the floor and all they do is bitch, right? The first 10 minutes, I'm bitching about this, about not solving any problems. Right. And it's like, okay, how do we transition this? Like, I hear you, I understand you. How do we make this better?
Correct.
Right. And I think, like, with, that, like, an employee that might do that, I think trying to empower them to say, hey, I understand your frustrations and I get it. I've been there too, like, more of like an empathy side. And then, okay, what are some ways that we can solve this problem? Right. And that might be, like you're saying, like, your time to speak as a leader, as a manager. Okay, there's your challenge. How do we overcome this challenge?
So, Brian, you come up with a solution. The employee, they're fired up. They feel like they just solved.
They got some private time with the boss, man.
Yeah. They just cured cancer.
Yeah.
But what's next steps? Like, what's the follow up?
Yeah.
You have the structure. You get your goal accomplished. But what's follow up? How do you see that through?
I think the big thing is making sure, and this is where I don't feel like enough leaders or managers do a good enough job at, is rehashing the meeting from before. right? So, okay, hey, listen, today's Tuesday, the, 10th. 2 weeks ago we met and it looks like, I'm pulling up my notes from OneNote or any kind of like note taking application, or hell, if you want to do it in email, that's fine too. But, OneNote is a thing that we use here internally where, we're tracking what we said the past 2 meetings. Okay. Are you still having that challenge from before? Rehashing that. Okay, well, it looks like you're still having the same issue. Why didn't we take anything away from the last one-on-one we had? Okay, how do we address that again? Or if we need to address it again, making sure that we're, hitting those points home so they can go out there on the sales floor and make some adjustments.
Another thing I love too, with you mentioned OneNote.
Yeah.
How do you know? And you and I both know this, but you have a meeting, and then there's nothing retained.
Yeah.
So if we're pushing how to
close business,
or no, technology wise,
okay,
how to set up a certain process
Sure.
in our platform.
Yeah.
The follow up should be, I want you to send me a video recording of you doing that process. But you don't say that on the front end. You say that on the back end.
Yeah.
Because when I tell you to send me a recap of what we just discussed, and I'm blindsiding you with that,
Yeah.
well, I'm just testing to see whether or not you're retaining the information we discussed, or am I wasting my time?
No, I think it's 100% valid. I think there has to be some sort of recap or, like you said, next steps, right? So discussing what it is, how do we get better? Here's a new process that we're rolling out, and then recapping that at the end, right? Where, okay, here's what we're doing. I'm going to send an email recap on this to describe exactly what we're doing, or what we talked about during that meeting. I think it's huge, man. I think those are some of the things that get missed, especially in, our logistics world, or hell, I think in any sales, business, organizational world that's out there. What are you really taking away from a one-on-one and rolling that into a progression or helping that person out with their career path?
I hear you there. And then next piece, I think, is the frequency.
Yeah.
You have, various caliber of employees, whether, they've been there a month or 5 years, 10 years. How do your one-on-ones vary depending on an employee's tenure or position?
That's always a challenging thing, right? But my opinion is you have to meet with the newer employees a lot more, right? Making sure that they're understanding the processes and the protocols and how we do things at our company or at within our industry. Then as a person starts getting it, they probably need less and less attention. A veteran salesperson that's performing and beating metrics, or a veteran operations person that continues to go above and beyond and a master at their craft, you probably need once a month, right? Depending on what they want, right? But the newer person, I would say that's probably every other week to make sure that they get up to speed, and then backing that down. I think those, when you talk about the frequency, I think those are, kind of good rules to follow. You don't have to specifically follow them to a T, but, making sure that you're getting time, with those people.
You talk about frequency. I think the main point is to keep your employees engaged and growing.
Sure.
Brian, you and I had a 2-year non-compete. We both had different roles when we set out that 2 years.
Sure.
I went to a payroll company where I was slinging payroll and HR left and right.
Yeah.
But I had an awesome supervisor who was, very positive, very engaging. Like he was invested in me. I knew that.
Sure.
And I was always leaving.
Yeah.
Because of what we were doing with our company, but he did an unbelievable job keeping me engaged and keeping me invested in the company.
Right.
And I wasn't staying there long term.
Right.
So if it were, the situation was different, he probably would have kept someone like me.
Yeah.
On the contrary, my wife was a PT and she worked at a company for 3 years. She never had one meeting. Never had one. And when she told me that,
it seems like bad leadership.
Well, yeah, she would come and she doesn't bitch and moan, but
sure.
She had hinted at never meeting with her boss.
That's interesting.
And it's a smaller company. Never met with her boss for 3 years.
It's crazy.
Needless to say, she's not at the company anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many, leaders out there that, need a gut check. And I think it's also, if you have the right type of employee, right? We discussed it on the last couple of episodes about hiring the right person. There is a level of accountability, right? Where people like you and me, when we were in that role, I wanted to make sure I had all my ducks in a row, or I had my potential pipeline filled, or I had details about that so I can give that to my boss, right? So like when you have these one-on-ones with your people and with your, sales reps or operational folks, like there's a level of accountability there where they can bring stuff to the table, and it's going to help them be more in tune with their sales process.
Yeah. Last thing I'll add with the one-on-ones is your employees feel a lot of times more comfortable in that one-on-one environment. They're going to be more vulnerable. They're going to be more open about what they're struggling with or how they truly feel. And I think that's where you uncover a lot of issues that they may not tell you, in a group environment or on the sales floor. So that's why it's important to get those things out of them and make them feel comfortable enough to share that with you. Otherwise, it may go 3 months down the road. You have a meeting, they're like, I've been struggling with X, Y, and Z for the past 3 to 4 months. And it's
Right.
like, you're like, shit. Like, I wish I knew that 3 or 4 months
Damn
ago.
it. Yeah. No, I think that, there's always, opportunities to learn, especially for leaders, right? Hell, for me and you today, right? There's always opportunities to learn. Going back to, some of that vulnerability, they might be dealing with an issue of, a theft or a fraud issue and trying to combat that, right? And we're going to talk about that next on the next episode.
There's other scams that these criminals are operating, and most of them avoid like using or leasing trailers and just taking the commodities themselves, or waiting for some of these trailers to be abandoned or at a truck stop, and they go and hijack the trailer or just pry open the doors and take the commodities.